Hey YouTube, Brian here, back with another video. This time I'm going to be doing something a bit different from our usual deck profiles and combo tutorials and actually show you guys some of my games on Maliss while climbing ladder on Yu-Gi-Oh! Omega. If you guys don't know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Omega is one of many third-party simulators that you can use to play Yu-Gi-Oh! On. It's very similar to other automated sims like Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro, now known as EDO Pro, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Nexus. Now, I'm not going to get into why I use Omega specifically, as I think all the third-party sims have their own pros and cons, and it will take a whole other video to compare them. For the purposes of this video, you just need to know that Omega has a pretty comprehensive ranked system. You earn rating as you play on the competitive ladder, going from bronze to silver and gold and so on and so forth until you reach the highest tier, which is Omega. And as of the recording of this video, I am currently at 4,500 rating in Omega, which places me in the top 20 leaderboards of the TCG format. I've been as high as top 5 in my past formats, but the point is that these replays are taken at the highest level that Omega has to offer. Obviously, you won't find YCS champions on this sim on the regular, but it does have an active user base in the hundreds of thousands of players, at least according to their login statistics. Anyway, now that you know what platform these replays are taken on, let's go ahead and talk about some of them. I tried to pick replays that are at least somewhat interesting to watch, and I'll be adding my own commentary as we go through them. If you like these kinds of videos and would like to see more in the future, let us know in the comments and by liking the video. Let's get started. So this replay is actually an older replay that happened when I was still playing the Terahertz version of the deck, but I felt that this replay was still worth sharing just because some interesting things happen in this game that I think would really help everyone understand like how you should be playing out the mirror match. So my opponent goes first, and he normal summons Cheshire Cat and uses Cheshire Cat effect, and then I elect to Ash here. Now in the mirror match, there's only two like real points you should use Ash on your opponent. It's either the White Binder effect to summon from banished and draw one, or you can Ash the Cheshire Cat. Ashing the Cheshire is acceptable because even though it doesn't directly stop the combo, it does make it so that, because if you let the Cheshire Cat through, there's a pretty good chance that they draw additional extenders or additional non-engine that can stop you on your turn. So Ashing the Cheshire, putting them on having an actual extender, I think is perfectly fine. 2 points you shouldn't Ash is you shouldn't Ash Red Ransom effect to search a field, to search a Maliss spell, and you shouldn't Ash TB11 to summon from the deck, because 90% of the time those don't matter. Like if those get ashed, it doesn't actually change your opponent's end board. So here we Ash the Cheshire. My opponent does have the extender, so he goes for Druid Swarm, and then he plays out the rest of his turn since I no longer have any interaction. Unfortunately, this hand was very engine heavy, not enough non-engine, but it's fine as you'll see because we're going to still crack our opponent's board even though they make the full Abal Griffin setup. So here my opponent just kind of goes through his lines. It's quite different from the lines that I posted in my combo video, but this was a while back, so perhaps it hadn't gone refined back then. But here you see my opponent makes Griffin and then makes Abal, and they don't actually use Abal effect in the main phase. I presume this is to play around Nibiru, because the idea is that if your opponent Nibirus you at the end of main, you can chain Abal effect to discard, and even though whatever you summon back will get tributed by Nibiru, your Abal will at least banish itself and come back during the end phase, so that on your opponent's turn, you can just use Abal effect again. Whereas if you go Abal effect in main phase and I chain Nibiru, that'll tribute the Abal. Your Abal won't summon anything back from the graveyard, and you've discarded a card for nothing. And so that's kind of like partly what I meant when I say that like Abal kind of plays into hand traps more heavily, because it's like my opponent has to purposely not use Abal effect here in order to not play into Nibiru, whereas like if my opponent had just ended on Cryptor, then like even a Nibiru on Cryptor like won't do anything. Like you can just Cryptor banish herself and then summon herself back after Nibiru resolves, or you can even just let Cryptor get tributed and then next turn you can White Binder banish the Cryptor. But anyway, so comes around to my turn and you can see we draw another White Rabbit. So this hand is pretty bad going second, honestly. Like 3 normal summons, 1 extender, and then GWC, which is not the best to have because it can't instantly be chained to dodge any of my opponent's effects. But you'll see that in Maliss mirror matches, the margins really are quite thin. Like you have to play pretty well in order to not lose. And here I'm going to set GWC 06. You always set first, just as a bluff, even if it can't be chained right away. And I normal summon Dormouse. My opponent doesn't do anything on summon, and it's because they have an imperm set. So they go ahead and imperm my Dormouse, which is pretty reasonable. And here I go underground to banish my Cheshire Cat, and my opponent chains a ball to finally summon the Griffin. Now, this is what I mean when I said in my deck profile that like sometimes people tunnel on like a Ball Griffin like way too hard, because Griffin in the mirror match realistically isn't very good, and I'll show why with the rest of this replay. But like if my opponent had just used a Ball effect to discard and pop my field spell instead, then I would have been stuck in a really bad spot. Now if I had any Bystials in my hand, that would be a different story, but you know, like in this situation I didn't. So and Griffin like just isn't very good in the mirror match, as I'll show here. So I go ahead and link my Cheshire into Lingaribo. I do a slight misplay myself. I should have summoned Cheshire Cat into the middle zone here, so that I can link my Dormouse into a Lingaribo and immediately be able to use my Cheshire Cat effect. Here I instead have to flip my GWC to banish my Dormouse and summon my Cheshire Cat in the zone of my Lingaribo, so that I can get Cheshire Cat's draw effect. It's not like the biggest misplay, but it is still a misplay nonetheless. So I go Cheshire, draw 2, draw a Dead Fool Loss and a Called By. That's a bit too late, but it's still useful. And then we just summon the White Rabbit back. Unfortunately, I don't get the White Rabbit effect to set, but it's fine. And I link for Decoder, and I link for White Binder, and I banish a couple of my names as fuel for Cryptor when I make her later on, and then I summon my Decoder back. Now, Lingaribo here is like pretty much like one-manning my opponent, because he knows that if he flips GWC, I'm just going to Lingaribo it. So he flips a TV11 here, hoping that I get baited into using my Lingaribo. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. This Lingaribo is being held specifically for the GWC. And so here, I go White Binder, set back my own GWC so I can use it next turn for follow-up. And I go ahead and make access code here, just to kind of force out all the stuff he has. And he does flip the GWC. I'll chain my Lingaribo to negate it, and then I'll go Battle Phase, run over the Griffin, use access code to pop his board, summon back my White Binder, and I do draw a Talents here, which is probably one of the best draws off the top, which draws me into a Magnemite, which is also pretty insane here. And so I go Magnemite to banish something from his grave, and I'm just going to end on a Cryptor here. Now, even if I didn't draw the Talents there were still a lot of lines I could go. I could go for Splash Mage, I could go for SP, I could even go for Dark Lines to take names from his graveyard. But the Talents in the mag certainly made things like much easier. So I go for Cryptor here, and I set the Called By, and I pass my turn. And my opponent gets their Bow back during the end phase, and so I just use Cryptor effect to get rid of it, so that isn't an issue later on. Now here, my opponent is going to start their turn by normal summoning Cheshire, and I know that they already used their Lingaribo, so I don't have to flip my GWC early in order to play around that. Now my opponent goes straight for Dark here, and I do make a misplay where I use Cryptor effect instead of using my MTP, instead of using GWC, summon back Binder, Binder banish White Rabbit getting MTP07, and then using MTP07 to banish the Dark. And the reason I say that's a misplay is because, generally speaking, you value your Cryptor banish more than you value your MTP07, because there are a lot more ways to stop MTP07. Well, I wouldn't say a lot more ways, but like Ash is a very common way that MTP07 will get stopped. So like if your MTP07 gets stopped, like let's say the last card in my opponent's hand is an Ash here. Sorry, let's say like there was like 2 more cards in my opponent's hand, and one of them is an Ash. Then like I can't rely on MTP just being my my second form of disruption, and I prefer to use the MTP first to do like an Ash check. If they Ash it, then I can still use Cryptor to banish the same target I would have banished anyway. If they don't Ash it, then Cryptor is still another banish that I can use later on. And you know, as I mentioned in my you know, deck profile combo tutorial, that like Cryptor is very hard to stop, because even if you like negate her in any way with imperm for droplet whatever, as long as she points to something, her banish will always go through. So I always try to use my 07 before I use my Cryptor. But in this case, I use my Cryptor first, and I get punished for it because my opponent instantly goes underground, and I don't have an immediate answer for the underground, unfortunately. I can Called By their White Binder if I want to, but the issue with that is that turns off my own White Binder, and then my opponent can instead banish their own Red Ransom, and then Red Ransom banish Dormouse from their deck, and then Dormouse banish their other names and keep comboing from there. So instead of instead of using Called By on their White Binder, I choose to summon my own White Binder, and then Called By their Red Ransom instead when they go to banish it with White Binder. So here, he banishes his names, I get my White Rabbit, and then White Rabbit gets me my MTP07, and I use my MTP07 to banish their White Binder, and then I go for the draw of my own White Binder. And I do get rewarded, and I draw a Nibiru off of the White Binder, which just further solidifies this game state. Because my opponent will go Dormouse effect to banish their Cheshire, and I'm gonna preemptively Baldrake here so that if my opponent decides to go for any like Link 2 plays, I can just Baldrake banish it. But here, like, you can see that my opponent has basically run out of gas. Their Ransom's banished, their White Binder's banished, their GWC is banished, so they can't recur any of this. They've gone through both their Link 1s. The only push they have left is Cryptor. But even if they make Cryptor here, Cryptor just doesn't really do anything into this whole board. Like, even if I don't have the Nibiru in my hand, I'm at 7,300 life points. Cryptor's not going to kill me by herself, and I have all the follow-up next turn. So my opponent's basically in an unwinnable game state, and they do have Thrust here to go for Talents, and even if they got the Talents to resolve though, and they make something like an access code, they have no Link monsters in the graveyard, and you can see that, like, I've basically been banishing all of their Link monsters with Bystials, with White Binder when I get the chance, because it's just a way to, like, prevent your opponent from making like a late game access code that, like, gets them a lot of advantage. So they basically have nothing to banish with access code even if they do that, and yeah, I just go ahead and Nibiru here. Tribute the whole board, summon both in defense, so there's nothing he can do. And he hasn't gone through Lizardos yet, so technically he can go for Lizardos, but he's already used all 3 of his names to summon themselves from the banished. So Lizardos actually is an extender here. And he can't make SP because SP needs effect monsters, and there's just nothing my opponent can do. They just passes, Nibiru comes back to me, I start my turn, and I banish White Binder from my graveyard. They have no interaction, so they will just surrender here. So in this replay here, you can see that we have drawn 0 engine. But fortunately, with the beauty of this deck is even if you brick and don't draw any engine, usually your hand is some combination of 5 very good non-engine cards. And you can see every single card in our hand here is pretty good as a non-engine. Full Loss here hopefully will draw us into engine so that we can start our plays next turn. And we are going second, so we will be able to take advantage of that. And as our opponent normal summons Chessie here, you can see that this is a mirror match. So I'll go ahead and Valor his Chessie effect just to put him on having the extender, and he does. So he activates Underground, banishes Dormouse. And here I can choose to Valor to Dormouse, but I choose not to, just because, partly because I already have Full Loss. And so I kind of want my opponent to commit a bit more. But also if I Valor here, my opponent can still keep playing through it because they can just go Link for Lizard, Lizard banish Chessie from the grave, summon Chessie, link those 2 for White Binder, set TB11, TB11, banish Binder for costs, summon White Rabbit from the deck, then Binder summon, draw a card, and then he can link both of them for SP, SP banish his White Rabbit from the graveyard, then White Rabbit set GWC or set his MTP07. So in my mind, like, since my opponent can keep comboing through that, I might as well just let this through and let Fuelos do the heavy lifting for this turn, and just kind of hold the Valor in my hand. So my opponent go ahead and banish the White Rabbit, and I go ahead and chain the Fuelos here so that in case he sets TB11, he can't chain TB11 to my Fuelos to give me 1 less draw. So my opponent opts to go for GWC instead, which is smart, and then he goes for Masquerade to give me 1 draw, but ends on an interruption, which I think is a pretty good play, and they even have the Thrust to go ahead and set Impulse from the deck. So here, it's not looking amazing for us. We do have the Metatronus, and we do have the Druisworm, but our Valor won't really be doing anything, and our MTP07 isn't really engine. So unless, you know, we top deck an engine piece, this is not looking amazing. Now, I will say, even if we don't top deck engine, there are ways to still make this work, because we can use Dark to steal names from their graveyard, and then use that to our advantage. But that would be kind of tough to do through Impulse, through Masquerena, and GWC. So in the end phase here, I don't want my Druisworm to get impulsed on my opponent's turn, so I just use it right away to banish their White Rabbit, and then in this way, at least when they use their Masquerena effect and they try to go for White Binder, they can't just White Binder, banish White Rabbit, get MTP07. They have to at least spend their GWC to summon the White Rabbit from banished and get their MTP that way. So I use my Druisworm here and draw for turn, and thankfully, it's an engine piece. So I draw Dormouse off the top, and that makes this turn a lot more doable. I set my MTP, I normal summon Dormouse, and my opponent doesn't react. And I go Dormouse, banish White Rabbit here, and my opponent impulses the White Rabbit, which makes sense. And in retrospect, I perhaps should have banished Chessy Cat instead of White Rabbit, just because I value having the White Rabbit more than I do the Chessy Cat. But either way, it's fine. So here, I go ahead and link for Lizard Dose, and I use Lizard Dose. Oh, sorry, before I use Lizard Dose, I use my Duoswarm to go ahead and force out the Masquerena. They chain the Masquerena, I chain my Metaltronus, and that'll negate the Masquerena and get me my copy of Chessy Cat from the deck. So, like I said, very good in the mirror match, just an E-Telly that's just E-Telly and Forbidden Chalice combined in one card, essentially. So that deals with the Masquerena, and then we can use Lizard to banish our Dormouse and go ahead and go into Red Ransom. At this point, I know that the set card is GWC06, so I know that if there's any more interruption, it can only be from my opponent's hand. And we go for the decoder here, and we go for the access code. And I'm not too afraid of like a Nibiru on the access code here, because I do still have the Underground to banish my Red Ransom from Grave. So I go ahead and summon my decoder back, and my opponent's going to go ahead and flip their GWC06 to summon back their White Rabbit, and then White Rabbit grab TB11. Here they're also going to do something kind of weird, which is they're going to preemptively Baldrake, which I don't quite understand this play, because if my opponent had Baldrake in their hand, they should have either played Baldrake super early to threaten the Lizard if I make it, or they should have just saved Baldrake for the battle phase, so that when I try to go for the kill shot, they can just use Baldrake to chum block by banishing another name from Grave. But instead, my opponent chooses to just use Baldrake here. They trigger the Dormouse, and they basically just have a lot of bodies on board. But it's not very hard to clear, since access code I can pop 2 of them, and then I can use Red Ransom, summon herself back, and banish just a name from the deck to feel Cryptor that I might make later on. So here I go ahead and make Splash Mage. It's fine to lock into Cyberse now, since I've already summoned like everything non-Cyberse that I needed. I go into my own White Binder, and I use White Binder to go ahead and set my GWC06, and I go straight for the battle phase. And yeah, just clean up all the names, and then I use GWC to go ahead and summon everything back and just attack for game. So probably the most common concern that Maliss players have is what happens when I get Lancia'd. And a lot of players might run stuff like Crossout, they might run stuff like Thrust to deal with the Lancia, but if you've watched my deck pro, you know that my opinion on that is you just have to run good non-engine. Like, if you just fill your deck with good hand traps, good non-engine, even when you get Lancia'd, you can just pass your turn, interrupt your opponent, and then when you get another turn, there's basically no way for your opponent to recover from that position. So I'll show that with this hand exactly. You'll see that we've drawn a pretty good hand. We have a Dormouse plus Bystial, which is pretty much nigh unbeatable for most hand traps. We even have the Droll in case our opponent Molcharmies us. But here our opponent does have the Kryptonite, which is the Artifact Lancia. So there's not much we can do with this hand. But I feel pretty good about just passing on this hand, because honestly, like, there's very few decks that can kind of kill through this kind of lineup. And I already know, since this is post side, that we're against Fiendsmith Ryziel, as you'll see in a moment here. And Fiendsmith Ryziel does not have the capacity to kill through 2 Bystials as well as a Droll Lockbird. So my opponent normal summons Ice, goes for X here, and he goes X search for Sword. Of course, we drop the Droll here to kind of limit the ceiling our opponent can have, and they go straight for Fiendsmith plays. So they go Fiendsmith, and they go Lacrima, Dump, Engraver, and they go Engraver effect, and of course I Bystial it here, so that they don't get access to the Caesar. Now they still go for Sword, they still go for X, and here I go ahead and preemptively Serenir, so that no matter what rank 4 they make, I can just go ahead and banish it with Baldrake. And my opponent is kind of out of options at this point, because they've already locked themselves into rank 4s from the extra deck, so they can't make anything like SP. And so my opponent just makes the tough choice to still make Detonator to at least force out the Baldrake and clear my board of these Bystials. But in doing so, they've left themselves with basically no interaction at all. They go direct for 2,000, but I draw my card here. It's a Gold Sark, which is great, since that's just another extender for us. And here, even though I can go full combo, I actually go for a pretty conservative line. and I don't go for Lizard, I don't go for Kneeling 2. I go ahead and spend my Gold Sark, and I make an early Cryptor. Now you might be asking why, because I currently don't have any Maliss cards banished, so my Cryptor banish isn't actually live. But you might be surprised how much damage like this board represents right now. So I go ahead and go battle phase, and we've not even played into Nibiru because we've only summoned 4 times. You know, I can't know if my opponent has Nibiru because unfortunately I can't check hands in Omega after a replay has been saved. And so here I go directly into battle and I go Cryptor, attack into the Necroquip, and then I use TB11 to go ahead and banish my Cryptor. My opponent ashes here, but honestly, like, that's totally fine. Like, whatever this TB11 summons can't attack anyway. So this TB11 was mostly just to banish the Cryptor for cost. So I banish the Cryptor comes back with 56, and that's not enough for lethal until I flip my GWC06 to banish my Cryptor again and summon her back again, and that'll be enough for game. That's something very common that you'll like kind of see me do, which is that like in a simplified board state, like I'm just trying to lose to as few cards as possible, and I don't want to overextend into a Nibiru when I don't have to. In that scenario where like there's very few cards my opponent has in their hand that could possibly stop me, I just go for a Cryptor OTK line, and yeah, that's how I play like my OTKs a lot of times. And also like it's kind of like a showcase of like, oh yeah, like even when you get Lancia, just play good non-engine and you're gonna be fine. So for this last replay here, you can see that we've opened a pretty good hand. We've opened a starter in the Right Rabbit. We have 3 different extenders in Bystials and Gold Sark, and we even have Called by the Grave to stop any hand traps our opponent might have. Now our opponent is going to start the turn by dropping Perulia in the draw phase. You can see that I have the Called by the Grave, but I don't even bother to use it because in this hand, we can give our opponent 0 draws, and we don't even have to really change our plays all that much. So I just hold the Called by since I want to use it on any other more high impact hand traps that my opponent has, and I just go through my standard combo, and I just go through Binder, I make Decoder, go for both GWC and MTP07, and then I just go for an early Cryptor here. And we've given our opponent 0 draws. We've ended on a Cryptor, GWC, MTP, Called by set. We have Droll in hand, 2 Bystials, and our opponent has just hand looped themselves for 1. And then, of course, our opponent starts their turn by imperming Cryptor. If you all have watched my combo video, you'll know that I love it when my opponent does this. Then they will go Minstrel because of course they're playing Mermail. They banish the Droll out of our hand, not a huge deal because now they're left with 2 cards. So I go Cryptor, targeting one of my banished cards, and then chain GWC to summon to Cryptor's zone so that Cryptor's effect can no longer be negated, and I just go ahead and banish their Neptibus. As we use our White Binder effect, our opponent will reveal that the last card in their hand is actually Ghost Bell. Now, I do wonder why they didn't use Ghost Bell on GWC. My guess was they thought that Cryptor's effect would be negated, and so they didn't bother negating GWC. But even if they did negate GWC with Ghost Bell, we have 2 Bystials in our hand. We could just chain Bystial, targeting our White Binder and Grave, summon to a Cryptor zone, and the end result would be the exact same. So yeah, this replay wasn't all that interesting, but I thought I'd share it just because I think it's very funny that our opponent just played the equivalent of Delinquent Duo against themselves, and it's just a way to show that like if you don't know what you're doing against Maliss, then you're gonna find yourself having a very rough time. So that's going to be it for this video. Hope everyone enjoyed, and like I mentioned at the beginning, if you like this kind of video and you want to see more of it in the future, let us know in the comments or by joining our Discord. The idea for this video actually came from one of our Discord members, so shout out to Tatsuo, and yeah, see you guys in the next one.